Hi, everyone, and welcome to the show. A single woman on a business trip thought she was safe inside her hotel room until she says she woke up to a man trying to sexually assault her. And get this, it was the front desk clerk who'd made a copy of her key. That's coming up. But first, many of you may know I host and produce a show called Court Cam on A&E Network, where we showcase moments from courtrooms around the country. Well, as we were preparing for an upcoming show, one story I was working on touched me so deeply that I wanted to dig deeper and share it here with you. It begins in Clark County, Washington, where 38-year-old Keeland Hill was charged with stalking and abusing his estranged wife, Tiffany, pushing her into a wall and violating a protection order. Now, while out on bond for those charges, prosecutors say Hill tried to buy a rifle and even placed a GPS tracking device on Tiffany's car. Now, this is footage from Hill's 2019 court appearance as prosecutors pled with Judge John Fairgrieve to up Hill's bond from $75,000 to $2 million.
I believe, the state believes, that if the defendant is released, he will kill the victim.
Next, a family representative read a chilling letter from Tiffany herself. She was a decorated Marine sergeant. Read it to the court.
I stopped reporting because he's made aware of it if I report, and I'm scared of his anger and retaliation. Despite my non-report, he continued to escalate because he feels he's smarter than everybody else and he's untouchable. He is here now because he placed a tracking device on my vehicle and tried to possess a weapon. Those two things are major indicators of what I've known all along, deep down, that he's going to kill me if he's given the opportunity. I beg you to not allow him to get to me and my children. I have no family here, nowhere to go. We have no money and nowhere to hide from him. He's made sure of that.
Despite the desperation those words clearly express, the judge only increased the bond to $225,000, nowhere near the $2 million the prosecution had asked for. And Hill made bond, was released days later. And he did exactly what Tiffany feared. He ambushed Tiffany in the parking lot of their children's elementary school, shooting and killing her in front of their 3 kids. Tiffany's mom, who was also in the car, tried to protect her daughter from the bullets. She was shot and wounded, but survived. Hill fled from police and later turned the gun on himself. A year later, the Tiffany Hill Act, sponsored by Washington State Senator Linda Wilson, was signed into law, allowing judges to order domestic violence offenders released before trial to wear a GPS ankle monitor that sends an alert to the victim's phone if the suspect gets within a certain range of where they are. Now, this story horrified me, not least because of how preventable Tiffany's death seemed, but she could not have made it more clear. The prosecutors, the police, the court, how much danger that she felt she and her children were in. The system failed her. And I think about her kids. And so I'm really appreciative that Tiffany's mother, Oria Kandi, and sister, Tabitha Ojeda, have joined me now from their home in Brooklyn, New York. Thank you both so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And I want to tell you, I've never done this before. I've done a lot of stories for this program on Court Cam, and I don't know, there was something about this story that moved me so much. So let me start, Tabitha, asking you, how are the 3 children doing?
They're doing really well. I mean, they're resilient, so they do as well as they can be. They take it day by day. They made friends. They have their space, At first, it was a little rough, but they're making it through. They definitely miss their mom a lot. But overall, they're super resilient and strong, really strong kids.
How old are they now?
Wow. 7, 9, and 12. She's going to be 13 soon, Kayla.
Wow. Oria, you survived this shooting, trying to protect your daughter. How have you been doing?
I'm good. It's difficult at times, but I go forward. I thank God my hands are okay. I have a little that I can't feel too much, but I'm good, thank God.
Let me ask you, Oria, you were obviously very involved with your daughter and with her efforts to try to get the restraining order and then to try to keep him behind bars, et cetera. I assume that you just feel like the system completely failed Tiffany and your family.
Yes, yes, because she made every effort to get out. And I was really going there. I mean, no, she was going through all this, but I really went to go bring her home, you know, with the kids. It was my granddaughter's birthday. It was Thanksgiving. I know she was very nervous. She was very fidgety. We're a very close-knit family. So we always vacation, you know, back and forth. So there was something different this time. And so that's what I'm just so glad for so many people that went through this and have the Tiffany Hill Act. So we're here to speak on it, to maybe now it'll help others, you know. I know it's in place, and I'm glad for that.
Tell me about that, you know, that effort that you made, that you really took the time, you took the effort to really get this act passed. Talk to me about that.
Well, that really was, you know, because I was injured and I underwent 2 surgeries. I thank the Senator Linda Wilson. She had approached because she had tried to pass this law 2 years previously, and it was denied. And so now she took this opportunity to really bring it out there, and she went, and a couple of friends when they were out there in Vancouver, because I had to come back to Brooklyn. You know, and they did a lot of efforts, and she really did a hard work, and I thank her for it. I thank, you know, for all the people for listening and being there and being aware that this can change other people's lives, even though it didn't help my daughter.
You know, I have to say, I have rarely heard someone so clearly and definitively in a courtroom say the words, "He's going to kill me," and hear the prosecutor say, "He's going to kill her." And then to her say, and I think that's probably what got me so angry and moved by this story, because I cover courtrooms for a living. And I don't see that kind of clear language that often, where she did exactly what she was supposed to do. There was no ambiguity. Right. She was entirely clear on what was going to happen if this guy was released. And then he went and he did it. And I think that is just, it is so maddening.
Yeah, that's what gets everyone. Yep, she was clear to the point, letting them know, crying out for that help, and that, you know, believing in the system, believing in everything, and it failed her.
Tabitha, tell me a little bit about your sister. We've been showing pictures of her. We've been showing the pictures of her in uniform. Talk to us about her.
My sister was my best friend, my second mom. She always said that I was her first baby and that I wasn't my mother's, because we were just that close. She was an amazing person, the person that would walk in the room and just light it up. She was giving and loving and caring, my biggest supporter. And I think in so many ways, that's why this was so much harder, because we are so close. And because she was like my mother, and knowing that she tried her hardest to break from this and do things the right way, you know, she sought out that help. She tried, and we advocated for this, and it's moving somewhere. But, you know, it's disheartening when I kind of wish that it was in place to save my sister, and that somebody would listen to her. And it just kind of reiterates this idea where domestic violence victims aren't really taken as seriously, and nobody really understands how dangerous it is for a victim to leave. And there's so much stigma around all of this. But she was my best friend, and I hope that, you know, one day this can help somebody else if this is what we have to go through, you know?
Yep. Well, look, it is reassuring to have gotten to speak to both of you, to know that the 3 kids are in such good hands, and I wish you both the best of luck, and I appreciate the strength that you both convey. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for showing the case. Thank you so much.
For more on this case and others, you can, of course, catch Court Cam on Wednesdays on the A&E network. Check your local listings. Coming up, it is a single woman's worst nightmare, and she says it happened at a hotel where she woke up to find a man trying to sexually assault her, and she says it was the front desk clerk who'd made a copy of her key. That's up next. It's any woman's worst nightmare. You're on a business trip at a nice hotel, you turn in for the night, only to wake up to someone trying to climb on top of you. And it's not just anyone. It's the guy from the front desk of the hotel. A woman staying at a 4-star hotel where rooms can exceed $300 a night in Kansas City, Missouri, says the desk clerk made a copy of her key and then used it to get inside her room and attempt to rape her. The victim woke up and started screaming. She was able to get the guy to leave, but not before she says he pulled off her pajama pants and exposed himself to her. The suspect is Fletcher Clardy, and he is charged with attempted first-degree rape. He's now being held on $150,000 cash bond. It happened at the Hotel Phillips in downtown Kansas City on December the 17th. The woman reportedly told police she was on a business trip staying at the hotel with some colleagues. They watched a Chiefs game before her coworkers went to bed. The woman stayed behind to have drinks at the bar. She told police Clardy was one of the waitstaff that delivered her drinks that night. She says she returned to her room between 2 and 2:30 a.m. and 2 hours later woke up with Clardy trying to force himself on her. She says Clardy apologized and said, "I thought you wanted it," before leaving. Surveillance video reportedly shows Clardy making a copy of the key and opening the victim's door. We reached out repeatedly to a representative for the hotel for a statement, have not received a response. We also reached out to Clardy's attorney, who declined to comment. Joining me now is Jesse Weber, host on the Law and Crime Network. Jesse, great to have you back here. Talk to us more about what we know about how this clerk got into the room.
Yeah, Dan, good to see you. Thanks for having me on. So we have Fletcher Clardy III, 30 years old, married, college grad. You would never suspect this, worked at the Hotel Phillips at the front desk. This woman, as you said, was on a business trip. And yeah, he interacted with her at the bar. She went upstairs and she had indicated that she was very sure she locked that door. But she claims that around 4:30 a.m. is when someone was in that room and she recognized that person based on his voice and said ultimately she was able to identify him from a lineup that it was Fletcher Clardy III. Now, Fletcher Clardy, you'd say, how do we know it's him? The surveillance footage from the hotel indicates that he was not only making a duplicate copy of the key, as you mentioned, the surveillance footage captured him on the elevator, and the hotel records also indicate that a duplicate copy of the key was used in her room. Now, if that wasn't enough, the fact that this alleged statement that he made saying, "I thought you wanted it," that also shows a connection, a prior relationship between the two. So when you think about how much evidence is against him right now, indicating that he is in fact the assailant for this attempted rape, it's just really something of nightmares when you really think about it.
Jesse, it seems to me, though, the defense, and that's why I reached out to the lawyer for him to see if they would tell us more, but it seems to me the defense is probably going to be that she somehow invited him there?
Well, I think it's twofold. One, yes, you could say this was consensual, that she wanted him to come up, which I find a bit odd. But anyway, the second point of it could be proper identification. It was very dark. What was exactly going on? She was intoxicated. She was having drinks downstairs. There are avenues I could already see that they might explore. This is just from an outside perspective with limited amount of facts, not saying it's going to work, but right now that's what I see they might be going towards.
And I would think as a legal matter, the hotel has to be concerned as well.
This reminds me so much of the Erin Andrews situation. Very different facts, but the hotel employed this guy. Did they not do a proper background check? Did they not have any complaints with him in the past? If she decides to file a civil suit against the hotel, I see something very similar happening where the hotel chain could be ultimately held responsible, comparative fault. Clearly, he's responsible, but also the hotel as well for employing him and keeping him on the staff that night.
All right, so we'll have to see what happens with this case. He's been charged but has not been tried, so we'll follow it. Jesse Weber, as always, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
Still to come, Elmo is going viral. Parents, you may want to take the little ones out of the room. You don't want them to see their favorite Sesame Street resident like this. Up next. Time now for our Mediaite Moments, where we check in on the day's bias, buzz, and bull in the world of cable news and beyond. If there is one thing we know to be true about the media, is that there is a bias towards conflict. Whether it's cable news wars or presidential debates, people tune in to see a good fight. So it's no surprise television shows turn to dramatic conflict to boost ratings. I guess we should hardly be surprised by the now viral feud that has so many talking about Sesame Street. Yes, the ugly episode brewed up between Elmo and Zoe's pet rock, Rocco. And as is so often the case, it started over a spat about oatmeal raisin cookies.
That's Elmo's favorite. Oh, Gabby, can Elmo have an oatmeal raisin cookie instead, please?
Oh, gee, Elmo, that was my last one.
Oh, that's okay, Gabby. Elmo will just take this one.
No, wait, Elmo.
What?
Rocco says that he wants the oatmeal raisin cookie.
All right, so that's classic Sesame Street. But here's where it gets ugly.
Rocco! Rocco's a rock, Zoe! Rocco won't know the difference!
Yes, he will. You can't have that cookie, Elmo. Rocco wants to eat it.
Now, you see, Rocco is Zoe's pet rock. And Elmo makes a good point, suggesting that Zoe might not be sharing like she should, and is instead shrewdly using Rocco as a ruse to hoard the cookies.
How? How is Rocco gonna eat that cookie, Zoe? Tell Elmo! Rocco doesn't even have a mouth! Rocco's just a rock! Rocco's not alive!
Rocco is a rock, doesn't have a mouth, and is not alive. And this spat has now been viewed over 7 million times on just one Twitter account belonging to Rydizel. But here's where the hypocrisy kicks in, and I can't believe that Zoe didn't point this out. Before I say it, please have the kids leave the room. Okay. So, of course, the reality is that Elmo doesn't really have a mouth either. And he isn't really alive. Now, this fight is nothing new. There's been a long-standing beef involving Zoe, Elmo, and Rocco.
Hey, could I please play with you two? Please, please, please?
Well, Elmo was going to play with just Gabby, but, Elmo can tell that Zoe really wants to play.
Yeah.
So, yeah!
And you know what? There's somebody else who wants to play too.
Someone else?
Yeah, Rocco! He's my pet rock.
Zoe, rocks can't play.
Now, Elmo's disdain for Rocco may remind you of the way Fox News hosts treat President Biden, or like liberals treat Donald Trump supporters. But unlike the K Street political feuds, which are good for business, the Sesame Street squabbles are not. So someone clearly forced Elmo to smooth over this cookie kerfuffle. From Elmo's own Twitter account, he wrote, "Don't worry, this just happened, everybody. Elmo and Zoe practiced sharing and are still best buds forever. Elmo loves you, Zoe, ha ha ha." But he added, Elmo doesn't want to talk about Rocco. And so even on Sesame Street, they apparently do the all too typical non-apology apologies. It's a Friday. That wraps up our media buzz, bias, and bull. Coming up, not on my roads or in my skies. A state senator says he doesn't want the federal government transporting January 6th riot suspects through Oklahoma. We're going behind the headline with the state senator about the bill he's fighting for. It's up next. As we pass the one-year anniversary of the attack on the Capitol, certain politicians and members of the media continue to try to minimize January 6th. Now, as regular viewers know, I have criticized the amount of attention and coverage the left-leaning media gives to the January 6th Commission. But you've also heard me say that I think they should throw the book at anyone who attacked police or even who vandalized property at the Capitol. One political leader is going further than just minimizing the event. Oklahoma State Senator Nathan Dahm is proposing a bill that would stop the federal government from transporting what he calls political prisoners through Oklahoma by air or by road. Now, putting aside what anyone thinks about January 6th, how does anyone think it would be legal or constitutional for a state to decide when or where the feds can enforce federal law? Here to answer that question is Oklahoma State Senator Nathan Dahm. Thank you very much for coming on the program. Appreciate it. So what am I missing here? How do you think Oklahoma or any state has the power to say we aren't going to allow the federal government to enforce federal law in our state?
Well, if you look at the political theories of nullification and interposition, which were put in place by Thomas Jefferson, who was one of the founding fathers involved in the Declaration of Independence and drafted the Kentucky and the resolutions that were passed and the Virginia resolutions that dealt with this. Just because the federal government does something or says something doesn't mean the federal government is doing it in a constitutional manner, doesn't mean the federal government has the constitutional authority to do that. And states do have not only that authority, but that right to interpose against the federal government. We're supposed to have checks and balances, not just within the federal government of the executive, legislative, and the judiciary, but we're supposed to have checks and balances between the states and the federal government. So this is one way that we can put a check on the federal government that is seemingly prosecuting political prisoners.
Right, but this is an issue that has been clearly resolved by the Supreme Court, starting in Marbury versus Madison and beyond, which came after what you're talking about with Jefferson, where it is clear that the feds are allowed to enforce federal law in your state, whether you like the law, you don't like the law. The notion that somehow each state gets to decide if they like or approve of federal enforcement of federal law, and you have to admit that that's pretty absurd.
Well, when people talk about the Supremacy Clause, what they don't realize is that the Supremacy Clause doesn't just say whatever the federal government wants to do. It says this Constitution and all laws of the United States made in accordance thereunto. So we have to actually be in conformance with the Constitution. The 9th and 10th Amendments also make abundantly clear that all power not given to the federal government are reserved to the states or to the people, and the people reserve that power.
But this is the power of the federal government. This is not power that we're talking about that doesn't specifically exist within the federal law. This is clearly something that the federal government is allowed to do. They're allowed to make laws that talk about violations on federal property, like the Capitol. And they are now enforcing the law. And notice I'm not even tackling the broader questions about what you think about January 6th, et cetera. I'm almost just looking at this through a legal prism, which is, this is a non-starter. I mean, as you know, many people in your state have described this as a sort of just a political stunt. And as a legal matter, it seems to me that you have to view it that way because, yes, you're throwing out a lot of references to the Constitution, but none of them are applicable to the question of whether the federal government can enforce federal law in the state of Oklahoma.
Well, I do want to talk about the broader picture because people are calling January 6th an insurrection. It was not an insurrection. None of these people have been charged with insurrection. And when we do talk about people's rights, the state does have a right to stand up for people when they are being put under unusual and extreme circumstances, when they're being denied bail, when they are being put under, excessive bail is being required, and when they're being held in solitary confinement or these types of things. Yes, the state does have an opportunity to stand up for our people and potentially for other citizens of other states and say, no, we're not going to allow this to continue to happen. And there's a lot of questions about what happened on January 6th. Yes, I will admit that there's a lot of questions, but the feds are far overreaching.
Right, but again, your opinion that the feds are overreaching is legally irrelevant. I mean, the notion that somehow a state gets to decide whether it likes a federal law or not, and whether the federal government can enforce it in the state is, of course, ridiculous, because then any state could decide on any federal enforcement of a law. This is overreach by the federal government. Oh, no, we can't support this. This is over. Of course the states can't do that.
Of course they can't. That's why there's no legal marijuana being sold in any states anywhere in America when it's still a violation of federal law.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
Marijuana. No.
Wait a minute. Marijuana is illegal under federal law. but yet the states are still able to allow their citizens to be able to purchase that and consume it and everything.
That's different. That's different than saying that the federal government can't enforce a particular law. You're talking about whether they should be required to enforce. That is different from being about saying we're not going to allow the federal government to enforce federal law in our state. And again, I mean, you can, now let's go big picture, because you mentioned big picture a moment ago. You want to sort of minimize January 6th. Do you view yourself as anti-law enforcement?
I'm sorry, you broke up on that one.
I was saying, do you view, fair enough. Do you view yourself as anti-law enforcement? Because I would think the only way you could take the position that what happened on January 6th doesn't matter that much is if you simply don't really care about the police officers who were attacked there.
So first of all, I would ask where I said that January 6th doesn't really matter that much. You will not find me saying that. That's a false characterization. Second of all, if you actually read the bill and read the legislation, I do have a carve out for felonies. Because yes, if somebody was assaulting a police officer, if they are found guilty of that, of an actual felony, then yes, that is something that could certainly be.
But how can they be found guilty? But you don't want them to be transported at all. You're saying if they're found guilty, but you don't want them to even be transported to face trial. You're saying that they shouldn't even go over the state of Oklahoma in an airplane.
If it is anything other than a felony. So if it was a felony, they could still be charged. They could still be transported. But we're seeing these misdemeanor charges of people parading in a government facility, having access to a government facility that they didn't have access to, even though the door was held open for them. And they're being, in some instances, held longer than what the actual punishment under federal law would be.
So, look, I will tell you, I've said publicly that I think that I distinguish significantly between the people who attack cops and the people who are engaged in property damage from the people who just sort of sauntered in. I've said that I don't think the book should be thrown at people who sort of sauntered in. But the notion that the state of Oklahoma is going to prevent the federal government from enforcing the law in that state, I want to get you to at least admit, that this bill is going nowhere, right?
No, I don't know that. You'd be amazed at what bills we can't move. There's always a possibility. I will admit that it does stand an uphill battle, absolutely. But I will say we do agree that no, the book should not be thrown at these political prisoners, is what they are.
They're not political prisoners. They're not political. What's the problem? The political, because all of the law enforcement is so liberal, right? All people go into law enforcement for a career because they're far lefties and they want to just take down. I mean, this notion that sort of this is all politics.
Don't be absurd.
Do you want to talk about the January? Let me finish the question. I promise I'll let you respond. I promise I'll let you respond.
And say that I'm characterizing
hang on one second.
That way. That's a false characterization.
All right, I promise I'll let you respond. So I will agree that you can make an argument about the January 6th commission, right? I talk politics, et cetera. Fair discussion to have there. The notion that the people who are being prosecuted for violating the law are political prisoners, that's the part that I'm saying that's absurd. Now, I'm sorry, please respond.
I disagree. I think it is absurd that people that walked into a building, a public building that they rightfully own because the doors were held open for them by law enforcement personnel, and that they are now being arrested, prosecuted, persecuted, that they are facing loss of jobs and everything else because of a politicized DOJ that is selectively choosing when to enforce the law, because they aren't enforcing the law and throwing the book at the rioters that took place all last summer or any other time. It is being very selective. It is being politically targeted. So yes, I will stand for my statement.
So I would say two things.
Not by your characterization.
First of all, right, fair enough. I'd say two things to that. First of all, I think you'd then agree if someone didn't hold the door open, if it wasn't law enforcement holding the door open, it sounds like you would support then prosecuting them. And the second thing I would say is, and you may not be aware of this because I've been very supportive of throwing the book at people who were involved in the summer riots as well, that the people who were involved in the summer riots have gotten longer sentences than anyone that was involved in the Capitol riot. Now, there are some people who didn't get as hard, but this notion that they haven't been prosecuted at all is a myth. Final word to you.
I did not claim that they haven't been prosecuted at all. But if you look at it overall, whether it's Portland, Antifa, all these different things, you can very clearly see that there is a politicization of taking place with DOJ, with prosecutors. They are being very selective in their prosecution. And as far as what you said about those that if they did commit crimes, yes, it should be prosecuted, but we should be able to see the video footage and the evidence rather than having that suppressed. So we have a true picture of what really went down on January 6th. And we know whether or not there were FBI informants or other people involved agitating the situation.
There's a lot of video available for you to check out online. It's pretty
and
disturbing.
there's thousands of hours that have not been released by the government.
Yeah, and once it's released, will you then? And so the stuff that you've seen, it doesn't matter, right? It's until you get to see everything. What you've seen doesn't matter.
Once again, what's with these broad characterizations? Everything, all that's not journalism. Come on.
Well, you just said to me that the government is effectively hiding this evidence, and I'm saying to you, we have enormous amounts of evidence. We have enormous amounts of video, hours and hours of video.
We do have
and
hours
I'm just
and hours,
saying,
and we have thousands of hours that are not being released.
Okay,
Thousands.
but that doesn't relate to. But again, you can. But I know this may seem surprising, but you can actually charge people based on the evidence that we have, right? You can actually watch it,
and you can
yourself,
also selectively
right?
edit video footage, like we saw with Kyle Rittenhouse with the prosecutor.
Look, again, don't get me started on Kyle Rittenhouse because you and I will probably agree on Kyle Rittenhouse. So, rather than ending on a point of agreement on Kyle Rittenhouse, let's just say Oklahoma State Senator Nathan Dahm, thank you very much for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Dan, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Coming up, 3 strikes and he's out. A popular sports journalist scrapped from MLB Network after more than a decade. The apparent reason? The commissioner didn't like being criticized by him. That's next. Said much about his departure. He did seem to sort of nod to the reported reason behind it. In a tweet on Monday, he wrote, "Can confirm MLB Network has decided not to bring me back. I always strove to maintain my journalistic integrity, and my work reflects that." Joining me now is Andrew Marchand. He's the sports media columnist for the New York Post. He broke the story about Rosenthal's departure. Andrew, thank you so much for coming on the show. Appreciate it. All right, so take us through this a little bit as to how you're so certain that the reason he's out is because of the things he said about the commissioner.
Well, you kind of outlined what happened, but back in 2020, where the pandemic was starting to really roar, there was a question if Major League Baseball was going to even play. There was a lot of acrimony between the commissioner's office and the Players Association trying to come to an agreement. And Rosenthal wrote a column about it, which was pretty even-handed. I mean, obviously there was some light touches at the commissioner. And then he had a couple other columns as well where he's been critical of baseball. And so when you have an organization like MLB Network, which is owned by the major league owners and which is the commissioner has control over it, they're going to want to have a say in terms of what is reported and how they are shown. And so they didn't like what he said.
But I guess I don't watch MLB Network enough to know the answer to this question, but do they present themselves as a place that actually is like reporting on what's happening in baseball, or do they portray themselves as like the Russian news service of baseball where they're just sort of saying what the owners want them to say?
Yeah, well, look, this is what happens with these type of places when you look at MLB Network. They hired Bob Costas. They hired Ken Rosenthal. They hired Joel Sherman, John Heyman, Tom Verducci. These are top broadcasters with Costas, and then insiders in baseball in terms of writers with the other guys I mentioned. And why do they do that? Well, for credibility. And I think everyone who comes in agreement with MLB Network when you work for another publication or you're an established journalist or you're Bob Costas, they might not admit it, but they know that it's not exactly a perfect arrangement because MLB Network is owned by baseball. In effect, you're working for the people you're covering. So you're always going to have this problem. And so the trade-off is, number one is you hope that they'll let them be as honest as possible. And really they have in large part, but then you're going to have blowback like you always do. I mean, you have blowback anyway. You probably get blowback all the time from people who are mad at things you say and you don't even work for them.
Never. People love everything I say. They agree with everything all the time. Well, Andrew Marchand, it's good. The good news is that we've still got independent journalists like yourself out there. Thank you for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.
Put
the gun down! Put it down, I'm gonna shoot you!
A woman with a shotgun refusing to listen to officers as they arrive on scene to reports that she won't let her boyfriend leave and their kids inside too. Sean Stix Larkin takes us through the terrifying moments caught on body cam up next. Thank you for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.